Snow fell softly over the mountain resort of Montrevel, transforming the narrow roads and pine forests into a picture of festive calm. The Grand Evergreen Hotel stood proudly at the heart of it all, glowing with warm lights and Christmas decorations that promised comfort and cheer. Inside, however, an undercurrent of tension stirred one invisible to most, but immediately apparent to Hercule Poirot. Poirot had arrived reluctantly, persuaded by a well-meaning friend who insisted that the mountain air and Christmas atmosphere would do him good. Poirot disagreed with both notions. The cold was unpleasant, the snow untidy, and yet there was something else. Something wrong. His little gray cells, he noted, were already whispering their unease. The hotel lounge was filled with guests gathered around a magnificent Christmas tree, its branches heavy with ornaments and shimmering lights. At its base lay wrapped gifts, symbols of generosity and goodwill. Poirot surveyed the room carefully, noting not the decorations, but the people. It was always the people. There was Sir Raymond Calloway, a wealthy financier whose booming laugh dominated the room. He held court effortlessly, glass in hand, basking in attention. Beside him stood his wife, Margaret Calloway, elegant and distant, her smile carefully measured. Poirot observed the way her eyes rarely met her husband's. Nearby lingered Lucas Avery, Sir Raymond's business partner, a man whose polite demeanor barely concealed sharp ambition. Poirot noticed how Avery watched Calloway, calculating rather than admiring. Then there was Eleanor Finch, Sir Raymond's personal secretary, efficient and reserved. Her loyalty unquestioned, at least on the surface. As Christmas Eve dinner concluded, Sir Raymond rose to propose a toast. He positioned himself near the Christmas tree, its lights reflecting in his glass. "To success," he declared cheerfully, "and to those who know how to seize it." The words, Poirot noted, landed differently on each listener. Sir Raymond drank deeply. Moments later, the glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. His expression changed not to surprise, but to dawning horror. He clutched at his chest, gasping, before collapsing beside the Christmas tree. Screams erupted. Chairs scraped back. Someone cried for help. Poirot moved forward calmly, kneeling beside the fallen man. He needed no examination to reach his conclusion. The discoloration of the lips, the suddenness, it was unmistakable. Poison. Poirot murmured softly. The snowstorm outside intensified, sealing the hotel from the outside world. The roads were impassable. The guests, moments ago wrapped in holiday cheer, now found themselves trapped together with a killer among them. Poirot straightened slowly, his expression grave but focused. He glanced at the glittering Christmas tree towering above the body, its festive beauty now stained by death. "Ms. Amos," Poirot said quietly, adjusting his mustache, "someone has placed poison under the Christmas tree. And I assure you this was no accident." As fear spread through the room, Poirot's little gray cells began their careful work. Christmas goodwill had been shattered. In its place lay motive, opportunity, and a crime that demanded order. The Grand Evergreen Hotel, once alive with Christmas warmth, now felt strangely hollow. The lights still glowed, the tree still shimmered, yet every ornament seemed to watch in silent accusation. Sir Raymond Calloway's body had been carried from the lounge, but his presence lingered heavy, unsettling, unavoidable. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, hands folded neatly, observing the guests as they gathered under the watchful eyes of hotel staff. Shock displayed itself differently on each face. Some wore it openly, others hid behind politeness. Poirot trusted neither. In his experience, people smiled most when they had something to conceal. Margaret Calloway sat stiffly in an armchair, her gloved hands clenched in her lap. Tears glistened in her eyes, yet her composure was remarkable. Poirot noted how quickly she regained control, how carefully she chose her words when others approached her. Grief, he reflected, did not usually arrive so neatly arranged. Lucas Avery paced near the window, staring out at the relentless snowstorm. He spoke often, too often, explaining where he had been, what he had done, how shocked he was. Poirot recognized this pattern well. Voluntary explanations were rarely given without reason. Eleanor Finch remained quiet, assisting the hotel manager with efficiency that bordered on mechanical. She avoided the center of the room, preferring the edges where observation was easier than participation. Poirot noticed her eyes flick toward the Christmas tree repeatedly, as though drawn by something unseen. Poirot requested that no one leave the hotel. The storm had made escape impossible anyway, but order was essential. He asked simple questions, nothing confrontational. Where were you standing during the toast? Did you see Sir Raymond's glass before he drank? Who approached the tree that evening? Answers came quickly, too smoothly. Everyone claimed little knowledge. No one had noticed anything unusual. Poirot listened patiently, nodding, allowing contradictions to form naturally. Truth, he knew, did not require effort. Lies did. Later, Poirot examined the lounge more closely. The shattered glass had been removed, but faint stains remained on the carpet. He studied the base of the Christmas tree. Among the gifts lay a fallen ornament and a small wet mark barely noticeable. Someone had been close to the tree moments before the toast. Poirot turned his attention inward, replaying the scene carefully. Sir Raymond had stood confidently, lifted his glass without hesitation, and drank. That suggested familiarity, trust. The poison had not been forced upon him. It had been offered or prepared by someone he did not suspect. As night deepened, tension tightened its grip. Guests retreated to their rooms, locking doors behind them. Poirot remained awake, seated in the quiet lounge, his thoughts precise and orderly. Everyone smiles, he murmured to himself, adjusting his mustache. But the little gray cells, they see what the smile tries to hide. By morning, Poirot knew those smiles would crack, and when they did, the truth beneath the Christmas tree would finally begin to show itself. Poirot intended to find it. Morning arrived reluctantly at the Grand Evergreen Hotel. The snow outside piled high against the windows as though the mountain itself wished to keep its secrets hidden. Christmas Day dawned without celebration. No carols, no laughter, only quiet footsteps in the corridors and guarded glances exchanged over breakfast trays left untouched. Hercule Poirot's early disorder unsettled him, and a murder committed beneath a Christmas tree was a particularly inelegant affair. He returned to the lounge, now stripped of its festive illusion. The Christmas tree still stood, but its lights had been switched off, leaving it dull and lifeless, much like the mood of the hotel. Poirot requested the glass from which Sir Raymond had drunk, now carefully preserved by the hotel manager. He examined it closely, holding it up to the light. The rim was clean, wiped meticulously. Too meticulously. Someone had handled it with care after the poison was added, or perhaps before, to remove their own trace. He turned his attention to the drinks themselves. Sir Raymond had favored a particular brand of spiced wine, prepared specially for him by the hotel staff. Yet Poirot discovered that the bottle used that night had been opened earlier than usual. Someone had had private access to it, time enough to add something lethal without detection. Poirot questioned the staff quietly. No accusations, only gentle curiosity. One detail stood out. Eleanor Finch had been seen near the service table shortly before dinner ended, adjusting the placement of glasses beneath the Christmas tree. It was a small act, easily dismissed, but Poirot never dismissed small acts. Later, Poirot invited the remaining guests to the lounge. He spoke calmly, almost conversationally, about routine and habit. "We are creatures of comfort," he said. "We trust what is familiar, especially at Christmas." Margaret Calloway's gaze flickered briefly toward the tree. Lucas Avery crossed his arms defensively. Eleanor Finch remained composed, though Poirot noticed the slightest tightening of her jaw. Poirot reconstructed the scene aloud. The toast. The confidence. The immediate collapse. This, he said softly, was not a crime of opportunity. It was prepared, carefully. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The poison had not been added in haste. It required planning, access, and knowledge of Sir Raymond's habits. Someone knew exactly which glass he would choose, and ensured no one else would. The snow continued to fall, sealing their isolation. Inside, the circle of suspicion narrowed. Poirot returned to his thoughts, arranging facts with meticulous care. A prepared glass. Familiar trust. A killer who relied on routine and on the assumption that Christmas would blind everyone to danger. The little gray cells, Poirot murmured. They tell me this is only the beginning. And beneath the silent Christmas tree, the truth waited patiently to be uncovered. By midday, the Grand Evergreen Hotel felt smaller, its corridors narrower. Its once welcoming spaces now charged with suspicion. Christmas decorations still adorned every corner, but they no longer symbolized joy. To Poirot, they resembled carefully wrapped packages, each hiding something unknown, perhaps dangerous. Poirot began his inquiries with Sir Raymond Calloway's history. He learned that Calloway had made as many enemies as he had fortunes. His business dealings were ruthless, his loyalty selective. He believed strongly in dominance, a trait that rarely endeared him to those closest to him. Margaret Calloway was first to speak with Poirot privately. She described her marriage in polite, restrained terms, too restrained. Beneath her elegance lay resentment, long suppressed. Sir Raymond, she admitted, had controlled everything. Finances, decisions, even friendships. Poirot listened sympathetically, but he noted something more telling: relief flickering beneath her grief. Lucas Avery's interview was far less composed. Avery spoke of betrayal. He and Sir Raymond had built their empire together, but in recent months, Avery had been quietly sidelined. Contracts had been altered, profits redirected. Avery's anger was evident, though he masked it with humor. Poirot recognized ambition wounded. It often demanded restitution. Eleanor Finch's motive was more subtle. Years of service had bound her to Sir Raymond, yet loyalty did not equal affection. Poirot learned that Eleanor had recently discovered irregularities in Calloway's affairs, financial and personal. Knowledge, Poirot reflected, could be as dangerous as resentment. Poirot arranged these motives carefully in his mind. Each suspect had something to gain. Each had reason to fear Sir Raymond's future actions. And each had been present beneath the Christmas tree. That afternoon, Poirot noticed something curious. Among the wrapped gifts, one box remained unopened, plain, unmarked, placed deliberately near the tree's base. No one claimed it. Poirot examined it closely. Inside was nothing but shredded paper, carefully arranged. A distraction, Poirot realized. Or a signal. Someone had needed an excuse to approach the tree. The gift had provided it. Wrapped innocence concealing deadly intent. As evening approached, Poirot stood alone in the lounge, studying the tree once more. Motives, like gifts, were rarely what they appeared. They were wrapped in courtesy, tradition, and holiday cheer. But Poirot knew only one contained poison. And before Christmas night ended, he intended to unwrap the truth. As darkness fell early over Montrevel, the hotel lamps cast long shadows across the lounge, giving the Christmas decorations an almost theatrical quality. Hercule Poirot seated himself opposite Eleanor Finch, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was composed for a woman whose employer had died violently only hours before. Poirot began gently, asking about her work. Eleanor spoke with precision, describing years of managing Sir Raymond's schedules, correspondence, and finances. She knew his habits intimately: when he preferred his drinks, how he disliked change, how he trusted routine. Poirot listened attentively. Familiarity, he knew, was often the murderer's greatest ally. When Poirot mentioned the irregularities she had discovered, Eleanor hesitated for the first time. She admitted that Sir Raymond had been involved in questionable dealings, hidden accounts, private agreements, and personal affairs that could have caused scandal. She had confronted him quietly, hoping for explanation. Instead, he had laughed, dismissing her concerns entirely. Poirot observed her carefully. There was no anger in her voice, only disappointment. That troubled him. Anger flared hot and fast. Disappointment settled deep and endured. Eleanor confessed she had intended to resign after Christmas. Sir Raymond, she said, had grown careless, arrogant. He believed himself untouchable. Poirot nodded slowly. Arrogance, he reflected, often blinded people to imminent danger. When asked about the Christmas Eve toast, Eleanor admitted she had arranged the glasses beneath the tree. It was her job, she said. Poirot did not contradict her. Instead, he asked one question: had Sir Raymond ever doubted her loyalty? For a brief moment, Eleanor's composure cracked. She looked away, just long enough. Sir Raymond, it seemed, had begun to suspect her, not of betrayal, but of knowledge. And knowledge, Poirot knew, was power. After she left, Poirot sat alone, reviewing the conversation. Eleanor had opportunity, access, and familiarity. Yet something remained incomplete. The poison had been placed with confidence, but also with desperation. Eleanor's demeanor suggested caution, not panic. Poirot next revisited the idea of the unmarked gift. Who had placed it? And why so deliberately? It had allowed someone to approach the tree unnoticed, but only someone already expected to be there would attract no suspicion. The answer lay not in who saw too much, but in who feared being seen. Poirot rose, adjusting his mustache thoughtfully. The truth, he knew, was tightening like a noose. And soon, one of his guests would find that Christmas offered no hiding place at all. Margaret Calloway received Hercule Poirot in the quiet sitting room overlooking the snow-covered pines. The fire burned low, its warmth carefully maintained, much like the woman herself. She was dressed in black now, appropriate and tasteful, her grief worn with elegant restraint. Poirot noticed, as he always did, how carefully she had prepared herself for this conversation. She spoke first, thanking Poirot for his courtesy and for the kindness he had shown since her husband's death. Poirot inclined his head politely, saying nothing. He had learned that people often revealed more when they were not interrupted. Margaret described her marriage as difficult but enduring. Sir Raymond, she said, had been a powerful man, accustomed to obedience. She had adapted, as many women of her generation did. Poirot listened, his expression neutral, though his little gray cells were very much at work. Endurance, he reflected, could easily turn into quiet calculation. Poirot asked about the evening of the toast. Margaret explained that she had stood slightly apart from the others, watching her husband perform, as he always did, commanding attention, enjoying dominance. She claimed she had noticed nothing unusual until the glass fell from his hand. Poirot asked gently if she had prepared Sir Raymond's drink. She shook her head immediately. That task, she insisted, was beneath her concern. Poirot noted the speed of the denial. Too swift, too rehearsed. When Poirot mentioned Sir Raymond's business dealings and the changes he had recently made to his will, Margaret's composure shifted almost imperceptibly. She admitted that her husband had intended to revise certain arrangements after Christmas. What those changes were, she claimed not to know. Poirot stood and walked slowly to the window, gazing at the falling snow. "Madame," he said quietly, "when one waits long enough, one begins to plan not action, but survival." Margaret said nothing. Silence, Poirot knew, could be louder than confession. As Poirot left the room, his thoughts aligned more sharply. Margaret had motive control, humiliation, and the looming threat of being discarded. She had proximity, trust, and familiarity. Yet something remained wrong. The crime required precise timing and knowledge of poison details, that did not fit her temperament. Back in the lounge, Poirot studied the Christmas tree once more. Beneath it lay beauty and deception intertwined. The killer had acted not with rage, but with careful inevitability. Margaret had waited many years, that was clear. But Poirot suspected the killer had not waited alone, and Christmas, with its promises of peace, had merely provided the perfect cover. The chill of winter had settled deep into the grand estate, seeping through the ancient stone walls and curling into the corners of the vast, echoing halls. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily from the leaden sky, coating the manicured grounds in a pristine, deceptive whiteness, a serenity that belied the turmoil within. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, a tension that seemed to hang from the ornate chandeliers and weave itself into the heavy drapery. Poirot moved quietly through the house, his small, precise steps barely making a sound on the polished oak floors. He was meticulous, always meticulous, and at this particular moment, the mind of the great Belgian detective was focused entirely on one individual, Mr. Gerald Thorne, the partner who now appeared to stand to lose everything. Thorne's face was a mask of carefully controlled composure, yet it was a mask that betrayed its wearer in subtle, telling ways. His fingers tapped nervously against the edge of a mahogany table in the drawing room, a rhythmic anxiety that spoke louder than words. Poirot observed him from a distance, noting every detail with his usual precision. The slight tremor in his left hand, the occasional darting glance towards the doorway, the thin line of tension around his mouth. These were not mere quirks. They were the language of fear, of desperation, of a man cornered by circumstance. And in Poirot's experience, a man who was cornered when tempted by opportunity could become dangerously inventive. Thorne's financial situation had become a matter of grave concern. Poirot had examined the records, the ledgers, the correspondence that spoke of deals made and obligations unmet. It was clear that the late Mr. Alistair Fenwick had been not merely a business associate, but the linchpin of Thorne's financial stability. With Fenwick's sudden and mysterious death, the foundation upon which Thorne had built his empire was trembling perilously. Every transaction now carried a weight of imminent collapse. Every signature, a potential ruin. Poirot's little gray cells had worked tirelessly through the night to unravel the complex web of financial interdependence. And the picture that emerged was both troubling and illuminating. Gerald Thorne was a man with everything to lose. And in desperation, everything might be risked. Poirot, with his habitual thoroughness, had arranged to meet Thorne in the library, a room both opulent and suffocating in its formality. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across the leather-bound volumes and glinting brass ornaments. The room smelled faintly of aged paper and wax polish, a comforting yet oppressive scent. Thorne entered, tall and impeccably dressed, though his composure wavered as he met Poirot's penetrating gaze. The detective, small, round, and deliberate in movement, gestured gracefully to a chair, his manners impeccable, his eyes never leaving the man before him. "Mon ami," Poirot began, his voice smooth, yet edged with the unmistakable authority of one accustomed to uncovering truth. "We must speak frankly. There are many shadows in your affairs that call for illumination." Thorne seated himself, his movements precise but tense. He offered a polite nod, his lips pressed together. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, I am prepared to answer your questions." Poirot poured tea with ritualistic care, the clink of china punctuating the charged silence. "Monsieur Thorne, you understand. I am a man who seeks order where chaos reigns. And at present, there is chaos in the finances, and in the hearts of those involved. Tell me, have you acted in a manner that would imperil your own position, or perhaps the position of another?" Thorne's fingers tightened around the cup. His eyes flickered, betraying a moment of indecision, but he recovered quickly. I have acted only in the interest of the company, Monsieur Poirot." Surely you understand that one must sometimes take measures to preserve one's livelihood." His voice was carefully controlled, but the faint quiver revealed the strain of lying, or perhaps the strain of fear. Poirot inclined his head, his expression mild, almost indulgent. "Ah, yes. Preserving one's livelihood. A sentiment noble in theory, but one must wonder, when does necessity cross the border into wrongdoing? When does fear of loss blind a man to the path of honesty?" His gaze sharpened, and Poirot leaned slightly forward, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "I must admit, Monsieur Thorn, the evidence is troubling. There are records, letters, indications that not all transactions were as transparent as they should have been." Thorn shifted in his chair, a barely perceptible movement, but one Poirot detected instantly. His composure was cracking, revealing the vulnerability of a man who had built his life on control and order. "Evidence, Monsieur Poirot. I assure you there is no impropriety. Any anomalies are simply misunderstandings, errors in accounting, nothing more." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against his cup, a deliberate, contemplative rhythm. "Errors, perhaps. Or perhaps the design of a man who knows the weight of what he might lose. You see, when one's fortune teeters on the edge of disaster, one's actions may take a creative turn. And the creative turn, mon ami, is often the one that ensnares a man most completely." Thorn's lips parted slightly, a silent protest forming but unspoken. He was caught in the net of Poirot's observation, unable to conceal the tension that had mounted over weeks of careful deduction. "Monsieur Poirot, I assure you I would never commit a crime." Poirot leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Ah, but crime is not always a single act, is it? Sometimes it is the sum of small actions, each seemingly innocuous, yet together forming a tapestry of deception. And sometimes, mon ami, a man does not know how far he has crossed until it is too late." The detective's words hung in the air like smoke, curling into the corners of the room, suffocating and revealing at the same time. Poirot could see the struggle in Thorn's eyes, the battle between self-preservation and conscience. And in that struggle, the truth often emerged, like a jewel hidden in the folds of human behavior. Poirot had also discovered hints of a second party, someone who may have influenced or collaborated with Thorn. Letters had surfaced, unsigned yet unmistakably linked to him, suggesting secret meetings and undisclosed agreements. The possibility of collusion added a dangerous dimension to the investigation. If another were involved, the motive, the opportunity, and the method were compounded. Poirot's mind traced the invisible connections, the hidden corridors of human interaction, where loyalty and greed intertwined like threads in a dark tapestry. The letters themselves were masterfully ambiguous, crafted to confuse and mislead any casual observer. Yet Poirot read them with a clarity born of experience. The phrasing, the choice of words, the subtle omissions, all spoke volumes to the discerning mind. One could almost see the hand of a man attempting to protect himself, while simultaneously manipulating circumstances to his advantage. It was a dangerous dance, intricate and precise, and Poirot followed its steps with meticulous attention. Thorn's composure, already fragile, began to erode under the weight of these revelations. He spoke more freely, revealing glimpses of past decisions, moments of compromise, choices made in the shadow of financial ruin. His voice carried the tension of a man trying to justify, explain, and excuse actions that perhaps he himself was only beginning to understand fully. Poirot listened patiently, noting the inconsistencies, the half-truths, the subtle admissions, each a vital piece of the puzzle. The detective's attention then turned to seemingly trivial details that others overlooked. A small vial, discreetly hidden among the ornaments of the Christmas tree, caught his eye. On its own, it appeared innocuous, a forgotten decoration perhaps. Yet Poirot's keen observation revealed its potential significance. The placement, The timing and the circumstance suggested intent. Opportunity, after all, was often revealed in the minutiae. In the small gestures that human hands betray when under pressure. As the conversation progressed, Poirot orchestrated a confrontation, presenting evidence, highlighting inconsistencies, and weaving a narrative that revealed the likely course of events. Thorne, confronted with the careful logic of the detective, could do little but respond in fragments, hesitations, and deflections. The facade of control faltered, the carefully constructed mask slipping to reveal the human beneath, anxious, fearful, and dangerously aware of the consequences. The tension reached its zenith as Poirot laid bare the implications of Thorne's actions. The potential financial ruin, the moral compromises, and the shadow of criminality combined to paint a stark picture. Poirot's reasoning was precise, leaving no corner of ambiguity for Thorne to hide. Every observation, every deduction, and every fact converged upon a single conclusion. The partner who had once seemed untouchable now faced exposure in multiple dimensions: social, financial, and ethical. Finally, Thorne's resistance collapsed. The man who had appeared so confident, so composed, was reduced to a figure of vulnerability. The truth, unavoidable and irrefutable, had emerged from the careful scrutiny of Poirot's intellect. Outside, the snow continued to fall silently, masking the estate in white tranquility. Inside, however, the house was no longer serene. It hummed with the tension of human frailty and the delicate balance of justice. Poirot, ever the observer, reflected on the fragile interplay of fear, ambition, and conscience that had led to this moment. The Christmas season, so often associated with joy and goodwill, had unveiled the darkest corners of human desire and the perilous edge of desperation. And as the fire crackled, casting long flickering shadows across the walls, Poirot knew that while this particular chapter had reached its resolution, the ripple of events would continue, affecting lives in ways both subtle and profound. The partner who had stood to lose everything had been unmasked. Yet the story, like the winter wind outside, was far from concluded. The morning after Thorne's confrontation, the estate felt strangely hollow. The relentless ticking of the antique clocks, usually a comforting rhythm, now seemed to echo the disquiet of the household. Servants moved with cautious efficiency, glancing at one another as though the very walls might whisper secrets. Poirot walked through the corridors with his habitual precision, his small frame belying the intensity of his observation. Every detail, every sound, every flicker of movement drew his attention. He sensed that the exposure of Thorne was not the end, but merely a pivot in a far more intricate plot. In the dining room, the family gathered for a subdued breakfast. Faces once vibrant with holiday cheer were now drawn, shadowed by unease. Poirot's eyes settled on Lady Fenwick, whose delicate hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. There was fear in her gaze, not merely for the recent revelations, but for the larger, unseen forces at play. Poirot, with his almost mystical understanding of human nature, noted the tension in the household like a symphony of silent alarms. Somewhere within these walls, another truth awaited discovery, cloaked behind smiles and polite conversation. A soft sound, a slight scuffing of a shoe on the marble, caught Poirot's attention. He turned and saw a figure at the far end of the hall, a servant whose presence seemed to shimmer with hesitation. The man's eyes darted to Poirot, then to the closed doors at the end of the corridor, as though uncertain whether he should approach or retreat. Poirot approached him with deliberate calm. "Mon ami, you have seen or heard something, have you not? Something that does not align with the ordinary movements of the house?" The servant swallowed, nodding subtly. He held a folded note, its edges slightly crumpled, a clue that had somehow slipped from its intended secrecy. It was left under the sideboard, sir," he murmured. Poirot took the note carefully, noting the handwriting. Unfamiliar, hurried, yet purposeful. The contents of the letter were chilling. It hinted at a deeper conspiracy, mentioning names that had not yet come under scrutiny and implying that the late Mr. Fenwick's death might have been orchestrated rather than accidental. Poirot's sharp mind began to weave together the possibilities. The case, which had seemed a straightforward exposure of Thorne's desperation, now revealed layers of deception previously hidden in the shadows. Someone else was manipulating events, someone clever, patient, and dangerously observant. Poirot requested a thorough review of the household's movements over the past weeks. He spoke with each member, each servant, and even the gardeners, cross-referencing alibis, noting inconsistencies, and examining minutiae that most would dismiss. A pattern emerged: small, almost imperceptible shifts in schedules, minor alterations in correspondence, subtle hints that someone had orchestrated interactions to conceal their presence and intent. Poirot's mind raced, connecting disparate threads into a coherent tapestry of hidden ambition. The investigation revealed a surprising lead: a previously overlooked business associate, Mr. Edwin Carlyle, whose recent travels had coincided suspiciously with the timing of Fenwick's death. Carlyle had been considered trustworthy, a minor figure in the family's eyes, but Poirot's intuition suggested that trust was often the greatest camouflage. In the quiet of his study, Poirot examined Carlyle's ledger, noting transactions that indicated both financial motive and opportunity. A carefully hidden series of deposits and withdrawals suggested an individual who had much to gain and even more to lose if their involvement were discovered. Poirot decided it was time to confront this new suspect subtly. Rather than a direct accusation, he staged a situation designed to observe reactions, to catch the flicker of guilt or fear that betrays the truly culpable. At the evening gathering, with the Christmas tree casting long, dancing shadows across the walls, Poirot engaged Carlyle in casual conversation, weaving mentions of events, timings, and financial matters into his questions. The conversation was polite, almost trivial on the surface. Yet Poirot observed every micro-expression, every hesitation, every twitch of a hand or flicker of an eye. The breakthrough came with a minor inconsistency, a detail Carlyle overlooked when recounting his movements on the night in question. Poirot's eyes lit with the thrill of discovery. The slightest slip of truth can unravel the largest of deceptions. He mentally catalogued this observation, aware that the revelation was part of a larger puzzle, one that required patience and precision to resolve. Poirot's approach was never rushed. He understood that the human mind, under the weight of suspicion and guilt, often revealed more in subtle ways than under direct interrogation. By midnight, the estate was quiet, the fire dying down to embers, casting flickering shadows across the empty halls. Poirot stood alone in the library, contemplating the evolving nature of the case. Thorne's exposure had been merely one act in a larger play. The true orchestrator, hidden behind the facade of everyday propriety, was now within reach of discovery. Poirot's mind, ever sharp and methodical, traced the next steps: careful observation, discreet questioning, and the accumulation of undeniable evidence. The Christmas season, once a backdrop of festivity, now served as the stage for a deadly game of human ambition, deception, and revelation. As he left the library, Poirot glanced once more at the Christmas tree, its ornaments shimmering in the fading firelight. Beneath the garland and tinsel, shadows moved unnoticed, secrets waiting to be uncovered. Poirot's small gray cells were already at work, piecing together the invisible threads, anticipating the next move in a game that was far from over. The investigation had taken a new turn, a more sinister one, and Poirot welcomed the challenge with the quiet confidence of a man who knows that no deceit, no matter how cleverly concealed, can withstand the scrutiny of reason and observation. The following evening, the estate was wrapped in a silent, almost oppressive calm. Outside, the snow lay thick and undisturbed, reflecting the pale light of the moon. Inside, the mansion's great halls echoed with quiet footsteps and the occasional creak of an old floorboard. Poirot walked slowly through the drawing room, his eyes meticulously scanning every detail, every object, every shadow. The detective's small, precise movements belied the intensity of his observation. Each artifact, each ornament, each book could potentially reveal the secret that had eluded him for weeks. The Christmas tree stood in the center of the room, its lights casting long, flickering shadows. Poirot's gaze lingered on the ornaments, each carefully arranged, each potentially hiding clues. He noted that one particular clock, an antique piece perched atop the mantel, had been moved slightly from its usual position. The subtle shift, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, sparked a chain of thoughts in the detective's mind. Clocks, after all, measure more than time, they mark moments. They conceal movements, and sometimes they hide secrets. Poirot summoned the household for tea, creating a casual gathering in which he could observe without overt confrontation. The family arrived, their faces polite but strained, and the servants hovered discreetly, as always. Poirot's sharp eyes noted every subtle gesture, the tension in Lady Fenwick's hands as she poured tea, the slight avoidance in Mr. Carlyle's gaze, the carefully measured movements of Thorne, who now seemed subdued yet watchful. Poirot's method was never direct accusation. Rather, he allowed the suspect's own instincts and slips to reveal the truth. As the evening wore on, Poirot orchestrated a moment that would expose the unseen. He spoke of time, clocks, and the nature of secrecy, weaving casual remarks into the conversation. Time, Ms. Amos, reveals all truths, does it not? And sometimes it is in the quietest hours, the moments unnoticed, that secrets hide most cunningly. The statement, seemingly innocent, caused a subtle reaction among the listeners. Poirot's keen eyes detected the micro-expression of surprise on Carlyle's face, the flicker of tension in Thorne's posture, and the slight tightening of Lady Fenwick's jaw. These were clues, subtle yet undeniable, indicators of guilt, fear, or knowledge. Later, as the household retired, Poirot remained in the drawing room, examining the clock in greater detail. The piece had been wound slightly differently, its pendulum rhythm ever so slightly altered. He tapped gently against its casing, listening for irregularities. Behind it, hidden in a shallow cavity, was a bundle of papers, carefully folded and meticulously preserved. Poirot's heart quickened. The papers contained correspondence, financial documents, and cryptic notes hinting at a planned manipulation of the Fenwick estate, evidence of a plot far more intricate than any he had yet uncovered. The detective's methodical mind traced every connection, linking the newly discovered evidence to the movements of each suspect. Thorne, already exposed, had acted in desperation. Yet these new papers suggested orchestration by another hand. Mr. Carlyle's careful financial maneuvers now appeared part of a broader scheme, while Lady Fenwick's behavior suggested she knew more than she admitted, though perhaps out of loyalty or fear. Poirot smiled inwardly. The intricate web of deception was beginning to unravel, revealing a pattern of human greed, ambition, and moral compromise. Poirot decided to set a trap, a quiet observation to test the reactions of the household. The next day, he suggested a casual tour of the estate, casually mentioning the fireplace, the library, and crucially, the drawing room with the antique clock. Each movement, each hesitation, each glance was noted. Poirot's attention focused especially on Carlyle, whose nervous adjustments betrayed concern. It was a subtle dance, a test of instinct, and Poirot's anticipation grew as he observed, knowing that the smallest slip could reveal the greatest truth. As evening fell once more, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room. He spoke calmly, with his characteristic precision. Ms. Amos, the truth is patient. It waits in the shadows, in movements unnoticed, in words unspoken. And sometimes it strikes, like the chime of a clock, to announce its presence. He gestured toward the antique timepiece, whose pendulum now swung with deliberate, measured motion. Tonight we will learn what secrets this house conceals. One by one, Poirot presented his deductions, subtly revealing inconsistencies, tracing actions, and linking motives. Each revelation was designed not to accuse openly, but to observe reactions, to let instinct betray the guilty. Carlyle's lips twitched, a micro-expression of fear. Thorne's eyes narrowed, wary of what Poirot had yet to reveal. Lady Fenwick's hands clutched her cup slightly tighter, a silent sign of tension. Poirot's small gray cells had traced the invisible lines connecting opportunity, motive, and means, and the trap he had carefully orchestrated was nearing its conclusion. Finally, as the clock struck midnight, Poirot paused. The room was silent except for the rhythmic ticking. The detective's gaze swept the assembly, noting the almost imperceptible signs of guilt and concealment. A faint shuffle, a breath held too long, a glance too quickly diverted, all indicators that the final revelation was at hand. Poirot's mind raced through the evidence, the observations, and the subtle interactions. The truth, long hidden behind the ornate garlands and festive lights, was ready to be exposed, and the guilty would soon confront the consequences of their ambition, their fear, and their deception. The night was heavy with anticipation. The snow outside had thickened, falling in a soft, persistent curtain that muffled the estate's usual nighttime sounds. Inside, the mansion was alive with a different tension, the culmination of days of deception, observation, and subtle maneuvering had brought Poirot to this moment. Every member of the household gathered in the drawing room, the air dense with expectation and unease. The Christmas tree sparkled innocently, its twinkling lights belying the darkness of secrets hidden within the walls. Poirot stood before the assembly, his posture small but commanding, his eyes sharp, each glance a silent assessment of the hearts and minds before him. He had observed, he had questioned, he had analyzed. Every misstep, every hesitation, every subtle flicker of expression had been catalogued in his meticulous mind. The moment for revelation had arrived, and he knew that precision, timing, and subtlety would unmask the truth more effectively than accusation alone. "Ms. Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm, deliberate, and measured. "We are gathered not merely to share in the holiday season, but to confront a truth long hidden. In this house, deception has walked as silently as the snow outside, and yet it leaves traces. Invisible, perhaps, to all but one who watches carefully." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, the silence amplifying their effect. The room seemed to shrink, the flickering light of the fireplace casting long, dancing shadows that mirrored the tension in the faces around him. Poirot's gaze swept methodically across the room, lingering on Thorne first. The man's earlier exposure had diminished his defiance, but now, under the steady pressure of observation, a deeper unease had begun to surface. Poirot then turned to Carlyle, whose composed facade now showed tiny fractious tremors in the hand, a fleeting glance that did not meet Poirot's penetrating stare. Finally, Poirot's eyes softened slightly as they fell upon Lady Fenwick, whose hands rested tightly in her lap, betraying a tension that words had yet to reveal. "Let us consider the sequence of events," Poirot continued, drawing each word carefully, deliberately. "First, there was the unfortunate death of Mr. Alistair Fenwick. Initially presumed accidental, the circumstances, when scrutinized, suggest otherwise. Second, financial pressures have driven certain actions, some desperate, some calculated. Third, correspondence and documents discovered in the course of my investigation indicate a web of intent and opportunity. And now, Ms. Amos, we must consider who among us has acted not merely out of desperation, but with deliberate, cunning intent." Poirot walked slowly to the antique clock on the mantel, the pendulum swinging with hypnotic regularity. "This clock," he said softly, "measures more than the passage of time. It bears witness to actions unseen, to movements concealed behind festive cheer. Beneath its casing, documents were found, letters, ledgers, and evidence that reveal the threads of a plot extending far beyond what we first imagined. He turned to the room, eyes blazing with quiet intensity. And it is through these threads that the hand of the guilty may be discerned. Thorne shifted in his chair, eyes narrowing, aware that his prior missteps were now laid bare to an even wider scrutiny. Poirot's gaze, however, moved past him, settling decisively on Carlyle. "Monsieur Carlyle," he said, voice unhurried, "you have acted with a sophistication most admirable. Your financial maneuvers, your concealment of letters, your precise timings all reveal a mind capable of meticulous planning. Yet even the most cunning cannot escape the scrutiny of observation, the careful reading of human nature." Carlyle's composure faltered. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if weighing words that could betray him further. Poirot's eyes did not waver. "You see, monsieur," he continued, "the smallest details, those that seem insignificant to the inattentive eye, often betray more than the grandest actions. The movement of a clock, the placement of a document, a gesture unconsciously performed, all speak volumes to one who watches carefully." Lady Fenwick's hands trembled slightly, but she remained silent. Poirot's mind had noted her subtle reactions, the interplay of loyalty, fear, and knowledge in her expressions. He did not need her to speak. Her eyes, her posture, and her restrained movements told their own story. Finally, Poirot's deduction reached its dramatic apex. "It is clear," he said, voice calm but resolute, "that the true orchestration of these events falls upon Monsieur Carlyle. Thorne acted in desperation, yes, but Carlyle guided, manipulated, and concealed, aiming to control both the outcome and the fortunes involved. And yet, even with such cunning, the human mind, under scrutiny, leaves a trail. We see it in hesitation, in inconsistency, in the smallest of gestures. Tonight, the trail has led to the truth." A gasp escaped Thorne, whose shoulders slumped slightly, acknowledging his own exposure but recognizing that he was not the mastermind. Carlyle's face blanched, and a tension like a drawn bow filled the room. Lady Fenwick looked between them, relief mingled with lingering fear. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Carlyle, observing the subtle crumpling of his composure. The web of deceit, greed, and ambition was fully unmasked at last. Poirot stepped back, letting silence dominate, allowing the truth to settle in the minds of those present. Outside, the snow continued its quiet descent, masking the world in a serene white, while inside, justice, careful, precise, and inevitable, had taken hold. The household, once rife with hidden fears and secret intentions, now understood the consequences of ambition unchecked, of deception carefully plotted, with his work complete. Poirot allowed himself a small smile, not of triumph, but of satisfaction in the restoration of order. The Christmas lights glimmered, the firelight danced, and in the quiet aftermath of revelation, the estate, at last, felt the fragile balance of truth and justice restored.